The oppressive heat of the West African morning pressed down on Ouagadougou as President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the window of his office in the presidential palace. At 37, he carried the distinction of being one of the youngest heads of state in the world, a position thrust upon him not through democratic election, but through the violent necessity of a military coup in September 2022. The weight of that responsibility had aged him beyond his years, etching lines of concern around his eyes that hadn't been there during his days as a captain fighting jihadists in the unforgiving northern territories. The morning briefing lay scattered across his mahogany desk, each document a testament to the mounting challenges facing Burkina Faso. Terrorist attacks had surged by 24% over the previous year, with casualty figures that made his stomach churn. Over 7,000 deaths in a nation of barely 22 million souls. The insurgency, once confined to the porous borders with Mali and Niger, had metastasized southward like a cancer, threatening regions that had known relative peace for decades. Traoré rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the familiar ache of sleepless nights spent wrestling with impossible decisions. Despite his military background and frontline experience battling extremist groups, stemming this tide of violence had proven to be his greatest challenge as a leader. Each tactical victory seemed offset by strategic setbacks. Each terrorist cell eliminated was replaced by two more. The hydra of extremism was proving resilient, adaptive, and seemingly inexhaustible. His reflection was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. "Mr. President," announced his aide, Major Sankara, a competent young officer whose calm efficiency had become invaluable in managing the chaos of presidential duties. "The children from École Première de la Paix have arrived for their scheduled visit." Their teacher, Madame Compaoré, a middle-aged woman whose kind eyes spoke of decades spent nurturing young minds, was giving last-minute instructions about proper behavior and respectful questions. "Good morning, children," Traoré greeted them, his authoritative demeanor softening as it always did in the presence of youth. These moments reminded him why the struggle mattered, why the sacrifices were worthwhile. "Good morning, Mr. President," they chorused with the unbridled enthusiasm that only children could muster. For the next half-hour, Traoré engaged with genuine interest as the children peppered him with questions. Some were surprisingly sophisticated, inquiring about economic policy and international relations with the earnestness of miniature diplomats. Others were charmingly naive, whether he had a favorite football team, if he lived in the palace all the time, and how many terrorists he had personally fought. He answered each question with patience and respect, never talking down to his young audience. Throughout the interaction, one child remained conspicuously silent. A small boy, positioned at the back of the group, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, stood quietly while his classmates jostled for attention and eagerly raised their hands. This child clutched something against his chest with the protective intensity of someone guarding a precious treasure. As the visit drew to a close and children began forming lines for their departure, Traoré made his way toward the silent boy. There was something in the child's posture, a solemnity unusual for his age, that commanded attention. "What is your name, young man?" Traoré asked gently, crouching to bring himself to the boy's eye level. "Ismael, Mr. President," the child replied, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. "And what are you holding so carefully, Ismael?" The boy hesitated, his small fingers tightening around the object before slowly extending his arms in offering. What emerged was an old leather-bound book, its cover cracked and weathered by decades of use, its pages yellowed with age. "It's for you, sir," Ismael said with the gravity of someone fulfilling a sacred duty. Traoré accepted the book with curiosity and growing intrigue. It was a Bible, Surprising in a nation where Islam was the predominant religion, though Christians comprised a significant minority of about 25% of the population. The leather binding spoke of age and frequent handling, its surface worn smooth in places where countless hands had held it in prayer or study. "Your grandfather wanted me to have this?" Traoré asked, studying the boy's serious expression. Ismail nodded with the solemnity of someone far older than his years. "He said it was very important, sir. He told me it contains a secret that only you should know." Before Traoré could probe further, Madame Compaoré called for the children to form their departure lines. The structured world of elementary education waited for no one, not even presidential curiosity. "Wait," Traoré called after the boy as he began to move away. "What is your grandfather's name? How can I reach him to thank him personally?" Ismail paused, turning back with eyes that held shadows too deep for childhood. "His name is Pastor Emmanuel Ouedraogo, Mr. President, but you can't reach him anymore, sir." The boy's voice dropped to barely audible levels. "He died last week. His last wish was that I bring you this Bible." With that devastating revelation, the boy rejoined his classmates, leaving Traoré standing in the garden with questions multiplying in his mind. Why would an elderly pastor he had never met send him a Bible as his dying wish? What secret could possibly be contained within its pages? And why use a child as messenger for something so mysterious and apparently urgent? As the children filed out of the garden in orderly procession, their excited chatter about meeting the president fading into the distance, Traoré turned the Bible over in his hands with growing fascination. The weight of it suggested substantial content, and the wear patterns on the binding indicated decades of regular use. A small piece of paper slipped from between the pages, fluttering to the ground like a dying leaf. He picked it up carefully, unfolding what appeared to be a hastily written note. The handwriting was shaky, but legible, suggesting either advanced age or illness, possibly both. The words made his blood run cold. "The truth lies where Matthew speaks of bread and stones. The children of Burkina Faso are in grave danger. Trust no one." Traoré felt a chill despite the morning heat that was already building toward the punishing temperatures of midday. Whatever this message meant, it carried an urgency that couldn't be ignored. In a country besieged by terrorist threats, no warning, however cryptic, could be taken lightly. He slipped the note back between the Bible's pages and tucked the book under his arm. Whatever secrets it contained would require careful investigation, but not here in the open garden where staff members and security personnel might observe. Some investigations demanded absolute discretion. Back in his private office, Traoré closed the door and activated the electronic countermeasures that prevented eavesdropping, an unfortunate necessity in modern governance. He examined the Bible more carefully, noting details that hadn't been apparent during his first encounter with it. The worn leather cover bore no title or distinguishing marks on the exterior, but opening to the inside front cover revealed a small inscription in faded ink. "Property of Mission Saint-Michel, Bobo Dioulasso, 1932. This Bible was almost a century old, a remarkable survivor from the colonial period when French Catholic missions had established footholds throughout West Africa. He began flipping through the delicate pages, searching for the reference mentioned in the cryptic note. Matthew was one of the four Gospels, but which specific passage spoke of bread and stones? Having been raised Muslim and educated in secular institutions, Traoré was not intimately familiar with Christian scriptures, though he respected all faiths that coexisted within Burkina Faso's pluralistic society. A brief knock interrupted his concentration. Colonel Zidane Zida, his most trusted aide and head of presidential security, entered after receiving permission. "Mr. President, the Security Council is assembled and awaiting your arrival," Zita announced, his military bearing impeccable as always. Traoré nodded absently, still absorbed by the Bible. An idea struck him. "Zita, do you have any familiarity with Christian scriptures?" The colonel looked surprised by the unexpected question, but answered promptly. "My mother was Catholic, sir. I attended Sunday school as a child before my military education began." "There's a passage in Matthew about bread and stones. Does that reference mean anything to you?" Zita's expression grew thoughtful as he searched his childhood memories. "I believe you're referring to Matthew 7:9, sir. The verse asks, 'Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone?' It's part of Jesus' teaching about God's provision for those who seek." Traoré quickly turned to the book of Matthew, locating chapter 7 with growing anticipation. As he opened to the relevant passage, something unusual caught his attention. Tiny marks had been made beneath certain letters on the page, marks so subtle they would be invisible unless someone was specifically looking for them. "Cancel the Security Council meeting," Traoré decided suddenly, his pulse quickening with the realization that he might have stumbled upon something significant. Traoré looked concerned at this departure from protocol. "Sir, the northern border situation can wait another hour," Traoré finished firmly. "And Zita, I need complete information on Pastor Emmanuel Ouedraogo, who died last week. Everything we can find about him, military service, family connections, community involvement, anything that might explain why he would send me this Bible." Once alone, Traoré focused intently on the barely visible marks beneath certain letters. Taking a notepad from his desk, he began the painstaking work of transcribing each highlighted letter in sequence. The process required intense concentration and perfect lighting to identify the nearly invisible markings. 20 minutes of careful work revealed that the pattern wasn't confined to Matthew alone. Similar markings appeared throughout other books of the Bible: Luke, John, Acts, Romans. The highlighted letters began forming words, and the words were constructing a message that made his heart race with alarming implications. When he finally sat back and reviewed what he had transcribed, the message was both clear and terrifying. Weapons cache 30 kilometers west of Wahyu-Gia, near abandoned French mine entrance marked by 3 baobab trees. Enough arms to supply 1,000 fighters. Planned attack on capital scheduled for next month. Additional caches at Banfora and Dori. Government infiltration confirmed at highest levels. May Allah protect you in the trials ahead. The implications were staggering. If this information was accurate, it revealed a conspiracy of unprecedented scope, a coordinated plot that could devastate not just the capital, but the entire nation. Wahyu-Gia was in the north, in territory where terrorist groups had established strongholds and maintained active operations. More troubling was the reference to government infiltration at highest levels. This suggested that the conspiracy included traitors within his own administration, people he trusted with sensitive information and critical decisions. The message concluded with, "May Allah protect you," which suggested the source might be Muslim rather than Christian, despite the information being hidden within a Bible. The religious text could simply be serving as an inconspicuous vessel for the intelligence, chosen because few would suspect a century-old Bible of containing contemporary military secrets. Colonel Zita returned with a thick file, his expression indicating he had found substantial information about the deceased pastor. "Complete background on Pastor Ouedraogo, sir," Zita reported, handing over the documents. Traoré scanned the contents rapidly. Emmanuel Ouedraogo had served as a Protestant pastor in a small village outside Ouagadougou for over 40 years, building a reputation for interfaith dialogue and community service. But the information that caught his attention was buried in the early biographical details. Before entering religious service, Ouedraogo had served in the Burkina Faso military until 1978, rising to the rank of sergeant before leaving under circumstances that weren't specified in the file. His funeral was held 3 days ago, Zita added. According to community leaders, he was widely respected for fostering cooperation between Christians and Muslims. No indication of involvement with extremist groups or intelligence activities. Family members? Traoré inquired. A daughter who teaches at École Primaire de la Paix, presumably the boy's mother. The boy's father was a soldier named Ahmed Ouedraogo, killed 2 years ago in an ambush near the Mali border while on patrol duty. The pieces began forming a clearer picture in Traoré's mind. A former military man turned religious leader who had lost a son-in-law to terrorist violence, somehow obtained critical intelligence about weapons caches and planned attacks. Rather than trust local authorities, who might be compromised according to his own warning, he encoded the information in an ancient Bible and entrusted his grandson to deliver it directly to the nation's highest authority. We need to verify this intelligence immediately, but with absolute discretion. If these weapons caches exist, and our enemies learn we've discovered them, they'll accelerate their timeline or relocate the arms. I can assemble a reconnaissance team from our most trusted operatives, Zita offered, already mentally selecting personnel. No, Traoré decided after a moment's consideration. This requires my personal involvement. We'll conduct the mission ourselves with a minimal team of absolutely reliable men. Zita's expression tightened with concern. Sir, I must object. The risks to your personal safety are acceptable given what's at stake, Traoré interrupted. If there's truly infiltration at the highest levels of government, any large operation runs the risk of being compromised before we even deploy. Besides, he added with grim determination, a leader who won't share the dangers faced by his soldiers has no right to send them into harm's way. And the warning to trust no one? Zita asked pointedly. Traoré looked directly at his aide, a man who had served loyally through the most dangerous periods of his military career and political rise. That warning specifically excludes present company. I trust you with my life, Zita. The question is whether that trust is sufficient for what we're about to undertake. Within 2 hours, a small helicopter lifted off from a secondary airfield outside Ouagadougou. The aircraft carried President Traoré, Colonel Zita, and 5 Special Forces soldiers, all veterans who had served with Traoré during his active duty fighting insurgents along the Mali border. Each man had been personally vetted and had demonstrated loyalty under fire. The helicopter maintained low altitude as it crossed the increasingly arid landscape of northern Burkina Faso. Below them, the terrain shifted from the relatively green areas around the capital to the harsher environment where terrorist groups found sanctuary among sympathetic populations and geographic isolation. Baobab trees near an abandoned French mine, Traoré muttered, studying satellite photographs of the target area. Colonial-era mining operations dotted this region, places where French companies had extracted mineral wealth for decades before independence, leaving behind scarred landscapes and empty promises of development. Formation ahead that matches the description, Traoré announced, pointing toward the horizon. 3 massive baobab trees stood like ancient sentinels against the harsh landscape, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable even from a distance. Beyond them, partially concealed by scrub vegetation, was the dark mouth of what appeared to be an abandoned mine shaft. Set us down 2 kilometers out, Traoré instructed the pilot. We'll approach on foot to avoid detection. The team disembarked onto rocky ground that radiated heat even in the morning hours. Standard reconnaissance protocols took effect immediately. Radio silence except for emergencies, weapons ready but not displayed, movement patterns designed to minimize visibility from potential observers. The absence of visible security could indicate several possibilities. The cache might be considered secure enough without guards, or sentries might be positioned where they weren't visible from this vantage point. Alternatively, the site might be temporarily abandoned. Ouattara and Diabaté establish overwatch positions, Traoré ordered quietly. The rest of us will investigate the mine entrance. Moving down the ridge with practiced stealth, the team approached the baobab trees. Up close, their massive trunks displayed the scarred bark and gnarled branches that spoke of centuries weathering West African droughts and storms. These trees were sacred in traditional Burkinabe beliefs, dwelling places of ancestral spirits. It seemed both ironic and somehow fitting that such a location might conceal weapons intended to destroy the very culture that revered these ancient giants. The mine entrance proved larger than it had appeared from a distance. Old timber supports showed weathering from decades of exposure, but remained structurally sound. More significantly, fresh footprints in the dust confirmed recent human activity. Lights, Traoré whispered, and tactical flashlights pierced the darkness ahead. The tunnel extended approximately 20 meters before opening into a larger excavated chamber. As they moved forward cautiously, their flashlight beams began revealing the contents of the underground space, and the reality exceeded even the dire warnings of the coded message. Wooden crates were stacked methodically against the stone walls, some bearing Cyrillic markings that suggested Russian or Eastern European origin, others labeled with Arabic script. Several metal containers with new padlocks stood nearby, their contents unknown, but presumably valuable given the security measures. Most alarming was a collection of electronic components, vehicle parts, and what appeared to be materials for constructing improvised explosive devices. The quantity was staggering, enough raw materials to create devastation on a scale that could cripple critical infrastructure throughout Burkina Faso. "Sir," one of the soldiers called softly, pointing to a makeshift table where papers were spread beneath a protective plastic sheet. The documents included detailed maps of Ouagadougou with specific locations marked in red ink, government buildings, foreign embassies, military installations, and most disturbingly, civilian targets such as schools and markets where attacks would maximize casualties and psychological impact. Traoré photographed everything with his secure phone, his mind racing through the implications of what they were uncovering. The coded message had been accurate, but it had actually understated the scope of the threat. This wasn't merely a weapons cache, it was preparation for coordinated attacks that could destabilize the entire nation and potentially trigger regional conflict. As they documented the cache's contents, a soft electronic beeping sound echoed from deeper within the mine. The team froze, weapons ready, until the sound repeated with mechanical regularity. Following the sound to a smaller adjoining chamber, they discovered a sophisticated communications setup centered around a laptop computer connected to various electronic devices. On the screen, digital numbers counted down with inexorable precision: 13 days, 6 hours, 43 minutes. "Countdown timer," Zita observed grimly. "Confirmation of the attack timeline," Traoré concluded. The coded message had warned of attacks planned for the following month, and now they had precise timing. Before they could investigate the computer system further, the distant rumble of approaching vehicles reached them from outside the mine. Their time was up. "Extract immediately," Traoré ordered. The team quickly erased evidence of their presence and retreated through the mine tunnel. Reaching the ridge where Ouattara and Diabaté maintained overwatch, they observed 3 pickup trucks approaching the baobab trees. Through binoculars, Traoré counted approximately 15 heavily armed men, their faces covered with cloth in the style favored by regional jihadist groups. Their movements showed military discipline and coordination that suggested training beyond typical insurgent capabilities. "Professional operation," Zita commented quietly. "These aren't ordinary terrorists." As their helicopter lifted off for their return flight to Ouagadougou, Traoré reviewed the intelligence they had gathered. The existence of the weapons cache confirmed the coded message's accuracy, but crucial questions remained unanswered. Who had placed that information in the Bible? How did Pastor Ouedraogo obtain such detailed intelligence? And most critically, who within Burkina Faso's government or military might be facilitating this conspiracy? The answers, Traoré suspected, would require deeper investigation into the pastor's background and connections, research that would need to be conducted with extreme care given the warning about government infiltration at the highest levels. The presidential palace maintained an atmosphere of deceptive normalcy as Traoré returned that evening, but beneath the surface, urgent preparations were underway. He had instructed Colonel Zita to select a small surveillance team to monitor the weapons cache from a distance while maintaining absolute operational security. Meanwhile, more information about Pastor Ouedraogo and his mysterious source became critical. "I want to meet with the pastor's daughter," Traoré told his aide, "but arrange it quietly. No official vehicles, no security detail that would attract attention. Complete discretion." Within hours, an unmarked civilian sedan delivered Traoré to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. He wore civilian clothes and a baseball cap pulled low to obscure his features. Few would expect the president of Burkina Faso to arrive unannounced and alone at such a humble location. Fatima Ouedraogo answered her door with shock evident on her tired features. She was a slender woman whose eyes spoke of recent grief and the exhaustion of single motherhood in difficult circumstances. "Mr. President," she gasped, quickly recovering her composure and inviting him inside. "Please, come in." The small apartment was meticulously clean despite its simplicity. Family photographs displayed on a side table showed the blending of Christian and Muslim traditions, evidence of the interfaith marriage she had entered, representing the religious harmony that Burkina Faso had long maintained. "I apologize for the unexpected visit," Traoré said, taking a seat at her modest dining table, "but I need to discuss your father and the Bible your son delivered to me." Fatima's eyes darted nervously toward a closed bedroom door where Ismael presumably slept. "I wasn't certain he had actually given it to you," she admitted. "My father wasn't himself during his final days. The doctor said pain medication was causing confusion and disorientation." "The Bible contained a coded message," Traoré revealed directly, watching her reaction carefully for any sign of deception. "A coded message? I had no idea such a thing existed." Her shock appeared authentic, suggesting she had been unaware of her father's final act of service to the nation. "Your father insisted the Bible reach me personally. He was adamant that Ismael deliver it directly into your hands, no one else. I thought it was simply the wish of a dying man seeking some final connection to leadership." "Did your father mention how he obtained this particular Bible?" She shook her head slowly. "It appeared about a month ago. A man brought it to him, someone I didn't recognize. They spoke privately for a long time, and afterward my father spent hours alone with the Bible each day. I assumed he was finding comfort in Scripture as he prepared for death." "This visitor, can you describe him in detail?" Fatima closed her eyes, concentrating on the memory. Tall, thin build. He had a distinctive scar running across his right cheek. His French was perfect, but something about his accent suggested he wasn't from this region originally. My father introduced him as an old friend from his military service days. This new information intrigued Traoré significantly. A former soldier turned pastor, receiving a coded Bible from a mysterious military comrade, then discovering it contained intelligence about terrorist activities. The military connection couldn't be coincidental. "Tell me about your husband," Traoré asked, gently, knowing this would be painful territory. "I understand he was killed in action 2 years ago." Pain flashed across Fatima's features, the wound still raw despite the passage of time. Ahmed was a good man and a dedicated soldier. He believed Christians and Muslims could live together in peace, which is why he married me despite our different faiths. Her voice wavered slightly. "After he died, my father helped us through our grief. He said Ahmed died protecting the future we were trying to build for Ismail." "Your father's military service, did he ever speak about that period of his life?" "Rarely. Only that he had seen things during his service that led him to seek God's forgiveness and dedicate his life to peace instead of war." As Traoré prepared to leave, concern crossed his features. If the conspiracy was as extensive as the evidence suggested, Fatima and Ismail might be in danger simply because of their connection to the coded message. "As a precautionary measure, I'm assigning security officers to monitor your neighborhood discreetly," he informed her, writing a secure phone number on a piece of paper. "If you notice anyone suspicious or feel threatened in any way, contact this number immediately. It connects directly to Colonel Zita, my most trusted advisor." Fear entered her eyes. "Are we truly in danger?" "I don't want to frighten you unnecessarily," Traoré replied honestly, "but your father uncovered something significant. Until we fully understand the scope of what we are dealing with, caution is warranted." As he prepared to depart, Fatima disappeared briefly into another room, returning with a small, leather-bound notebook. "My father kept this by his bedside during his final weeks," she explained. "I haven't had the strength to look through it yet, but perhaps it contains information that might help you understand what he was involved in." Back at the palace, Traoré retreated to his private study with Pastor Ouedraogo's notebook. The early pages contained sermon notes and personal reflections typical of a religious leader, thoughts on faith, community, and the challenges facing modern Burkina Faso. But entries from the final month told a different story entirely. The handwriting became more urgent, less organized, as if the writer was struggling with monumental decisions under severe time pressure. "M returned after all these years," read one entry. "Says the network has been reactivated. God forgive me for the role I once played in their creation. They were meant to defend our nation, not destroy it." Several pages later, "The Bible contains their operational plans. M insists only the president can stop this now. Too many officials have been compromised. Trust no one in normal channels." And finally, dated just 2 days before his death, "My time grows short. The cancer leaves me little strength for this world. Ismail will be my messenger. May God protect him and President Traoré. The future of our country depends on stopping what we foolishly helped create decades ago. Operation Fantôme must never be allowed to rise again." Traoré stared at the final entry, Operation Fantôme, Operation Ghost. He had never encountered this designation in any military briefing or historical document, yet it seemed to be something from Burkina Faso's past that was now resurfacing with deadly contemporary relevance. He reached for his secure phone and contacted Colonel Zita. "I need everything available on something called Operation Fantôme from the 1970s. Military archives, classified files, anything that might exist. And find anyone still alive who served with Emmanuel Ouedraogo before 1978. As he ended the call, Traoré looked again at the old Bible sitting on his desk. What had begun as an unusual encounter with a grieving child had revealed a conspiracy stretching back decades, threatening the very foundation of Burkina Faso's stability. Somewhere in this web of secrets lay the answers to who was planning to attack his country, why they had chosen this moment to strike, and how they had managed to infiltrate his government at the highest levels. The race to uncover the truth had begun, with the nation's survival hanging in the balance. Dawn found President Traoré in the secure records facility buried 3 levels beneath the Defense Ministry headquarters. Few people knew this underground archive existed, a Cold War relic from the era when Burkina Faso, then called Upper Volta, had been caught between global superpowers competing for influence across Africa. Colonel Zita had worked through the night to locate classified files on Operation Fantôme, documents sealed for over 40 years and requiring presidential authorization to access. The musty folders now lay spread across a metal table, their contents painting a disturbing picture of Cold War paranoia and its contemporary consequences. Operation Fantôme was a covert program initiated in 1975, Zita explained, pointing to organizational charts and deployment maps. Its purpose was creating hidden weapons caches throughout the country as contingency preparation against potential coups or foreign invasion. A stay-behind operation, Traoré observed, familiar with similar strategies employed by Western intelligence services during the Cold War period. Exactly. Selected military officers were trained to establish and maintain these sites in absolute secrecy. Each cache was known only to the specific team assigned to its construction and security. Zita turned through several pages of personnel files. Emmanuel Ouedraogo served on Team 3, responsible for the northern sector of the country. Traoré examined a detailed but faded map showing approximate locations of these hidden arsenals. One marking corresponded almost precisely with the site we had discovered near Ohigioya. So the weapons cache we found is actually one of these Operation Fantôme sites, he asked. According to these records, yes, Zita confirmed. The operation was officially disbanded in 1978 when political conditions stabilized following successful negotiations between competing factions. All caches were supposedly discommissioned and their contents removed or destroyed. Obviously, that discommissioning was incomplete, Traoré noted grimly. But these documents don't explain how modern terrorist groups discovered these locations, or how they've been restocked with contemporary weapons. There's additional information, Zita continued, producing personnel files. Team 3 consisted of 5 members. 3 are confirmed deceased over the years, in addition to Pastor Ouedraogo. Only one other member remains alive, Colonel Maurice Diakité, retired from active duty in 1995. The name triggered recognition in Traoré's memory. Diakité maintained close relations with former President Compaoré's inner circle, didn't he? Very close. After retirement, he worked as a private security consultant while maintaining extensive connections within military and intelligence circles. He disappeared from public view approximately 3 years ago, with his last known residence in Bobo Dioulasso. A theory began forming in Traoré's mind. The mysterious visitor who had brought the coded Bible to Pastor Ouedraogo was described as having a distinctive scar on his right cheek. Check whether Diakité has such a distinguishing mark, he instructed. While Zita made inquiries, Traoré continued examining the Operation Fantôme files. The program's design was sophisticated. Each cache was constructed with hidden entrances, natural ventilation systems, and protection against moisture and corrosion. They were engineered to remain viable for decades if necessary, a testament to the Cold War era's strategic paranoia. Sir, Zita returned holding a military photograph. Colonel Maurice Diakité during a ceremonial parade in 1990. The image showed a stern-faced officer in dress uniform displaying a distinctive scar running along his right cheek, exactly matching Fatima's description of her father's mysterious visitor. It's confirmed then, Traoré concluded. Diakité brought the coded Bible to Ouedraogo, but the question remains, what motivated him to break decades of silence? What made him risk exposure to warn us? Before Zita could respond, Traoré's secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message from the surveillance team monitoring the weapons cache. Multiple vehicles arrived at 4:00 hours, heavy equipment being unloaded, estimated 30-plus personnel now on site, activity levels increasing significantly. The timeline was accelerating beyond their original intelligence. Whatever attacks were planned, final preparations were clearly intensifying. "We need to locate Diakité immediately," Traoré decided. "He's the key to understanding the full scope of what we're facing." Within hours, they had traced the retired colonel to a small compound on the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso. Satellite surveillance indicated the property had shown no signs of occupancy for at least 48 hours, an ominous sign given the circumstances. "I don't like this," Zita commented, as their helicopter approached the city. "If Diakité possesses the knowledge we suspect, he's either in hiding or—" He didn't need to complete the thought. Both men understood the lethal risks associated with possessing sensitive information in a country where terrorist groups had demonstrated their reach into government and military circles. They landed at a regional military base and proceeded by unmarked vehicle to Diakité's residence. The modest house sat behind a high wall covered with flowering bougainvillea, its metal gate secured with a padlock that showed fresh scratches around the locking mechanism. With weapons drawn, Traoré and his small security team entered the property cautiously. The front door stood slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. Inside, evidence of violence was immediately apparent. Furniture had been overturned, glass was scattered across the floor, and bloodstains marked one wall in a pattern suggesting severe trauma. "Secure the house," Traoré ordered, his voice tight with tension. The systematic search revealed no occupants, but in Diakité's study, they found clear evidence of what had transpired. Papers were scattered across the floor in chaotic patterns. A laptop computer sat gutted with its hard drive removed, and a wall safe hung open, its contents completely emptied. On the desk, someone had left a message written in what appeared to be blood. "Traitors to the cause will face judgment." "They eliminated him," Zina observed quietly, surveying the destruction. Traoré nodded grimly, but maintained focus on their mission. Search everything thoroughly. There might be something they missed in their haste. The team methodically combed through every room, finding nothing of significance until one officer called from the bathroom. "Sir, there's something unusual in the ceiling." A small access panel had been disturbed recently. Reaching up carefully, the officer retrieved a sealed plastic package containing a USB drive and a handwritten note. The note was brief but urgent. "For President Traoré, should I fail to reach you personally, the ghosts of our past have returned to haunt our future. M.D." Traoré stared at the USB drive, recognizing it as potentially crucial evidence while simultaneously understanding the security risks it might pose. Connecting it to any networked system could compromise their operations if it contained malware or tracking software. "We need an isolated computer system. No network connections, no possibility of external data transmission." Back at the regional military base, they prepared a standalone laptop, while Zita and two trusted intelligence officers observed. With appropriate caution, Traoré inserted the USB drive. It contained a single video file dated 1 week earlier. When activated, the file showed Colonel Maurice Diakité sitting in what appeared to be a safe house, his face gaunt from stress but his eyes clear and determined. He began speaking directly into the camera with the urgency of someone running out of time. "President Traoré, if you are viewing this recording, my attempts to reach you personally have failed, and I am likely dead. What I am about to reveal places my life in immediate danger, but the survival of Burkina Faso justifies that risk." Operation Fantôme, a defensive program I helped establish decades ago, has been corrupted beyond recognition. Rogue elements from our former military, working in collaboration with international terrorist organizations, have located our hidden weapons caches and are using them to stage coordinated attacks against the legitimate government. They call themselves les héritiers, the inheritors, and believe they are reclaiming Burkina Faso's destiny from foreign influence. Their leader is General Henri Ouattara, officially reported dead 3 years ago following a helicopter crash, but very much alive and operating from hidden bases along our northern borders. Under Ouattara's direction, they plan to strike the capital and 7 other major cities simultaneously, creating chaos sufficient to justify their seizure of power. I discovered this conspiracy accidentally through my security consulting work and have been gathering evidence ever since. I have encoded critical operational details in a Bible, a fitting irony, as both Christians and Muslims call this nation home and both communities deserve protection from what is coming. I will attempt to deliver this intelligence through my former comrade Emmanuel, who left our organization decades ago to serve God but remains trustworthy. One final warning, Mr. President. Les Héritiers have achieved infiltration at the highest levels of government and military command. Trust no one until this threat is completely eliminated. The future of our country depends entirely on your success. The video ended abruptly, leaving the room in heavy silence. Traoré's mind processed the devastating implications. General Ouattara, presumed dead for years, was leading a coalition of military defectors and international terrorists. Les Héritiers were planning coordinated attacks across multiple cities. Most disturbingly, the conspiracy included infiltrators at his own government and military command. This changes our entire operational approach. We cannot risk large-scale operations that might be compromised through normal command channels. We need a small team of absolutely trusted individuals to neutralize this threat. Sir, Zita asked, how do we handle multiple target sites across the country with such limited resources? Traoré's expression hardened with determination forged through years of combat experience. We start with the cache we've already located. If we can capture Les Héritiers operatives there, we might extract intelligence about other sites and identify their network of government collaborators. As they prepared to depart, Traoré took one final look at the frozen image of Colonel Diakité on the computer screen. The man had risked and ultimately sacrificed his life to provide this warning. That courage would not be wasted. Colonel Zita, Traoré said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. Select our most elite operatives for a night assault. We move against the Ouattara cache tomorrow evening. The setting sun painted the western horizon in brilliant shades of orange and crimson as Traoré finalized operational plans in a secure bunker beneath military headquarters. He addressed 12 Special Forces operators selected for the mission, men he had personally commanded and vetted, many of whom had fought alongside him during his active service combating insurgents along the volatile Mali border. What I am about to share is classified at the highest possible level, he began, gesturing toward tactical displays showing detailed intelligence about their target. We have uncovered a conspiracy against our nation by an organization calling itself Les Héritiers, a coalition of military defectors and terrorist elements planning coordinated attacks throughout Burkina Faso. The operators listened with professional intensity as Traoré outlined the mission parameters. Intelligence suggested approximately 30 hostile personnel at the weapons cache, all heavily armed and possessing military training that exceeded typical insurgent capabilities. Our primary objective is capture, not elimination, Traoré emphasized. We need intelligence about their broader network and the locations of additional weapons caches. However, be prepared for significant resistance. These are not ordinary terrorists. They are trained soldiers who have chosen treason. Colonel Zita stepped forward to detail tactical approaches. 2 diversionary teams would create controlled explosions at opposite ends of the site, while the main assault force entered through the mineshaft. Recent satellite imagery showed regular patrol patterns they could exploit during shift changes. As the briefing concluded, Sergeant Ouattara raised the concern weighing on everyone's mind. "Sir, if there are confirmed traitors within our government, how can we ensure this operation hasn't been compromised before we even deploy?" "Valid concern," Traoré acknowledged. "That's precisely why only personnel in this room possess complete operational details. We will use communication protocols established exclusively for this mission, and our departure will be disguised as a routine training exercise." Night had descended completely when 2 unmarked helicopters lifted off from a secondary airfield outside Ouagadougou. Against all established security protocols, and despite Zita's vehement objections, Traoré occupied the lead aircraft. Some missions demanded personal leadership, particularly when potential traitors within his command structure made delegation dangerous. 3 minutes to insertion point, the pilot announced as they approached the target area. Through night vision equipment, Traoré observed the distinctive silhouettes of the 3 baobab trees standing guard over the weapons cache. The helicopters touched down silently 2 kilometers from their objective, immediately beginning rapid deployment procedures. As teams disembarked and prepared specialized equipment, Traoré felt familiar combat focus sharpening his senses. Years had passed since his last direct participation in such operations, but training and experience created muscle memory that never fully faded. "Alpha Team positioned," came the first radio confirmation. "Bravo Team ready for diversionary action," followed shortly after. Traoré nodded to Zita. "Execute Phase 1." The operation commenced with precision as Alpha and Bravo teams triggered their diversions. Small explosive charges positioned to simulate accidental detonation of stored munitions, placed far enough from the main entrance route to draw defenders away from their primary approach. As predicted, most of the site's security forces rushed toward the apparent emergencies, leaving the mine entrance more lightly defended. Traoré led his assault team directly through the darkness, moving with speed and stealth toward their objective. They encountered 2 guards at the perimeter, quickly neutralizing them with non-lethal tactics that preserved their value as potential intelligence sources. At the mine entrance itself, a specialist carefully checked for booby traps before signaling all clear. Inside the tunnel system, the team advanced with practiced efficiency. Weapon-mounted lights provided minimal necessary illumination while preserving night vision capabilities. They reached the main chamber without encountering additional resistance, but what they discovered exceeded their worst expectations. "Sir, the weapons are being actively relocated," Zita whispered urgently. Indeed, the cache was in the process of systematic evacuation. Many crates remained stacked against the walls, but others had clearly been removed recently. Loading equipment and transport vehicles had been interrupted by our diversionary explosions, but the operation was well underway. "Secure all remaining weapons," Traoré ordered, "and locate someone who can provide information about where the rest have been taken." The team dispersed throughout the chamber, placing explosive charges on remaining weapons caches as a contingency measure. If they couldn't remove all the arms, they would ensure no one else could utilize them either. In a smaller adjoining chamber, they discovered what appeared to be a sophisticated command center. Maps of multiple cities covered the walls with attack routes clearly marked in red ink. Communication equipment linked this remote location to other sites, presumably Les Héritiers headquarters and secondary bases. "Sir, One operator called with urgency, "We have an active connection here." A laptop screen displayed a live video feed from another weapons cache, clearly a different location but similar in layout and organization. Figures moved purposefully through the frame, loading crates onto vehicles in organized fashion. The conspiracy was executing simultaneous operations across multiple sites. Before they could investigate the communication system further, gunfire erupted from the mine entrance. Their diversionary tactics had been identified as deliberate deception, and Les Héritiers forces were returning in strength to defend their facility. "Defensive positions," Traoré commanded. "Zeta, download everything from their systems immediately. We need minimum 2 prisoners for interrogation." The firefight intensified rapidly as Traoré's men established defensive positions, using the chamber's natural stone formations for cover. Their superior training and discipline showed clearly, but they faced numerical odds of at least 2 to 1 against opponents who knew the terrain intimately. Through his tactical communication system, Traoré received reports from Alpha and Bravo teams encountering heavy resistance as they attempted to establish supporting positions. "Sir, data download complete," Zeta reported, securing a storage device containing potentially crucial intelligence. "And we've detained their communications officer." A thin man in civilian clothing was being restrained nearby, his expression showing more defiance than fear despite his capture. "You are too late, Mr. President," the prisoner declared in Moré, one of Burkina Faso's indigenous languages. "Les Héritiers have already initiated the next operational phase." "What next phase?" Traoré demanded, approaching the man directly. "Where have these weapons been relocated?" The prisoner smiled with cold satisfaction. "You will discover soon enough. This revolution cannot be stopped by a single raid against one facility." A powerful explosion suddenly rocked the tunnel entrance, sending cascades of dust and debris into the main chamber while threatening to seal their escape route. "They're attempting to trap us," Zeta realized with alarm. "We must extract immediately." Traoré made a rapid tactical decision based on deteriorating circumstances. "Detonate charges on remaining weapons. We're taking our prisoner and this intelligence. All personnel, fall back to extraction point Charlie." As his team prepared emergency withdrawal, Traoré studied the operational maps one final time, committing critical details to memory. The attack plans were far more extensive than their initial intelligence had suggested. Not just government facilities, but civilian infrastructure designed to create maximum chaos and undermine public confidence in government protection capabilities. With explosive charges armed on short timers, the team retreated through a secondary tunnel system they had identified during mission planning. Behind them, the first detonations began, destroying weapons that would have been used against innocent Burkinabe citizens. The extraction proved chaotic but ultimately successful. Under cover of explosions and resulting confusion, Traoré's forces managed to break contact with their pursuers and reach the designated helicopter landing zone. As aircraft lifted off into the night sky, Traoré observed the column of smoke rising from the partially collapsed weapons cache. One major threat had been neutralized, but critical questions remained. How many other sites were still operational, and with their enemies now fully alerted to government knowledge of the conspiracy, how would Les Héritiers adapt their strategy? The prisoner sat silently across from Traoré in the helicopter's cargo compartment, his expression remaining unreadable despite his circumstances. Whatever intelligence he possessed would need to be extracted quickly and efficiently. Somewhere in Burkina Faso's vast territory, General Ouattara was accelerating his plans to overthrow the legitimate government and plunge the nation into chaos. The race against time had intensified dramatically, with the nation's survival hanging in the balance of the next few critical hours. The interrogation facility beneath military headquarters was deliberately austere. Concrete walls, metal furniture, and harsh lighting designed to psychologically pressure subjects while maintaining humane standards. President Traoré observed from an adjacent room as intelligence specialists questioned their prisoner, who had identified himself only as Fazal. "He's professionally trained in resistance techniques," Colonel Zita noted, watching the proceedings through one-way glass. "Classic deflection methods, minimal responses, occasional deliberate misinformation." Traoré nodded grimly. "This isn't a typical insurgent recruit. His educational background suggests formal military training, possibly including foreign instruction." After 3 hours of methodical questioning, the interrogators had achieved limited progress, beyond confirming the existence of multiple weapons caches and verifying the organization's name as Les Héritiers. Critical details about locations, timing, and leadership structure remained elusive. "We need a different approach," Traoré decided, entering the interrogation room personally. Fazal looked up with mild surprise as the president of Burkina Faso took a seat directly across from him. The professional interrogators withdrew, leaving the two men alone in the stark chamber. "Do you recognize who I am?" Traoré asked quietly. "Of course, Mr. President, the captain who became head of state, the man who expelled French forces after decades of neo-colonial manipulation." "Then you understand I'm not interested in games or procedural delays," Traoré stated evenly. "Les Héritiers are planning coordinated attacks across Burkina Faso. I want to understand your motivations." Fazal studied him carefully before responding. "The same fundamental motivation that drove your coup, Mr. President, freeing Burkina Faso from foreign domination, restoring our nation's authentic destiny. By murdering innocent civilians, by allying with terrorist organizations that have slaughtered our people for years. Necessary sacrifices for genuine independence," Fazal replied without visible emotion. "You have attempted to chart a moderate path, expelling some foreign forces while accommodating others, nationalizing some resources while permitting foreign companies to exploit others. These half measures leave Burkina Faso still dependent, still vulnerable to external manipulation." Traoré leaned forward intently. "And General Ouattara believes he possesses a superior vision?" A flicker of surprise crossed Fazal's features at the mention of the general's name, confirming their intelligence about the conspiracy's leadership. "The general understands what must be accomplished. After the coordinated attacks create sufficient chaos, there will emerge a new order, one truly independent of all foreign influence, whether Western or Eastern." "Tell me about the other weapons caches. How many exist? What are their locations?" Fazal's expression hardened with renewed defiance. "You have destroyed one facility. Perhaps you will locate others through your own efforts, but you cannot prevent what is approaching. Our operational plan includes contingencies for every scenario, including your interference." Traoré changed tactics, producing a modified version of one of the maps they had captured, altered to include notations that weren't part of the original documents. "We captured your communication systems intact," he stated confidently, "though this was partially deceptive. My technicians are decrypting your entire network. Soon we will possess every location, every operative's identity. Cooperation now might result in more lenient treatment." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the prisoner's composed features. "You're attempting to deception. Our communications employ military-grade encryption." "Do they? Then explain how we identified the cache near Benfora and the staging area outside Koudougou." Fazal's eyes widened slightly, enough to confirm these locations held significance, though Traoré had been making educated guesses based on attack patterns visible in the original intelligence. Les Héritiers will ultimately fail, Traoré continued with calculated confidence. The question becomes how many operatives will be captured or eliminated during the process. Those who provide assistance now will be remembered differently than those who maintain loyalty to the end. The psychological pressure was clearly affecting the prisoner. Fassal's composure showed stress cracks as he wrestled with competing loyalties and personal survival instincts. Finally, he spoke in a lower voice. "I cannot betray our fundamental cause, but I will share this information. Not all weapons are designated for use within Burkina Faso. Some are intended for operations in neighboring countries. The general's revolutionary vision extends beyond our borders, a pan-African transformation beginning here but spreading throughout the region." This revelation was deeply concerning and far exceeded their initial threat assessment. If Les Héritiers were planning destabilization operations in neighboring countries, the potential for regional conflict was enormous. "When do the attacks commence?" Traoré demanded. Fassal hesitated, then answered reluctantly. "The operational timeline has been accelerated following your raid. The first phase begins in 3 days, not the original schedule." The information hit Traoré like a physical blow. 3 days, 72 hours to prevent multiple coordinated attacks by well-equipped, professionally trained enemies with confirmed infiltrators in his government. "Where is General Ouattara located currently?" "I don't possess that information," Fassal replied, and Traoré believed his honesty. "Cell structure compartmentalizes intelligence. I encountered him only once at a training facility near the Mali border approximately 6 months ago." Traoré stood to leave, having extracted what seemed possible from this source. As he turned away, Fassal called after him, "Mr. President, you should understand that individuals within your inner circle report directly to the general. People you trust implicitly have divided loyalties." "Names," Traoré demanded, stopping immediately. Fassal shook his head. "I don't know their identities specifically, but they definitely exist. The general spoke confidently about having reliable intelligence sources within the presidential palace itself." Outside the interrogation room, Traoré conferred urgently with Zita about these devastating revelations. 3 days maximum, he said. "We must identify remaining weapons caches immediately." "Our technical team continues working on captured data. They have managed to extract coordinates for what appear to be 2 additional sites, one near Benfora, as you suspected, another outside Dori in the northeastern region. Prepare simultaneous operations to neutralize both locations," Traoré ordered. "But operational security must be absolutely airtight. If Les Héritiers truly have infiltrators in my inner circle, traditional command channels cannot be trusted under any circumstances." They relocated to a secure planning room, where Traoré outlined strategy to a carefully selected group of officers whose loyalty had been tested under fire. 2 coordinated raids would target the identified caches, while intelligence units accelerated efforts to locate additional sites and identify government infiltrators. As the planning session concluded, Traoré's phone vibrated with an incoming message from the security detail he had assigned to protect Fatima Ouedraogo and her son Ismael. "Subjects missing. Evidence of forced entry at residence. Blood discovered at scene. Requesting immediate instructions." Traoré's blood turned cold. Les Héritiers had taken the pastor's family, either as leverage or as punishment for their role in exposing the conspiracy. Either way, their safety was his personal responsibility. "I need a response team ready in 5 minutes," he told Zita grimly. "Sir, respectfully, you cannot personally respond to this incident, not with the larger national threat requiring your attention. That child delivered the warning that exposed this entire conspiracy," Traoré replied with absolute firmness. "I will not abandon him or his mother to les héritiers. Besides, whoever abducted them might lead us to higher-level operatives in their organization. As Traoré prepared for another dangerous mission, he reflected on how a simple Bible passed from a dying pastor to a courageous child had cascaded into a desperate race to save the nation. Now that same child's life hung in the balance, another innocent caught in a web of conspiracy decades in the making. The ancient Bible remained locked in Traoré's personal safe, its coded message having served its crucial purpose. But he couldn't escape the feeling that it retained significance beyond the information it had contained. In a country where Islam and Christianity coexisted, perhaps there was deeper symbolism in how this crisis had unfolded. A reminder that Burkina Faso's greatest strength lay in unity across religious and cultural lines, the very unity that les héritiers sought to destroy through violence and chaos. With renewed determination, Traoré prepared to rescue the family that had risked everything to warn him, even as time continued counting down toward coordinated attacks that threatened to tear his nation apart. The smoldering ruins of Fatima Ouedraogo's apartment told the story of violence and desperation. Overturned furniture, splintered doors, and bloodstains on the floor provided clear evidence of a fierce struggle. Traoré moved carefully through the small dwelling, his trained eyes noting details that others might overlook, signs that could reveal the identity and intentions of the attackers. Definitely les héritiers, he confirmed after examining discarded cigarette butts bearing foreign manufacturer markings. But how did they learn about Fatima and Ismail's connection to the coded Bible? The answer implied either extensive surveillance capabilities or, more troubling, information provided by someone within his own security apparatus. An elderly neighbor appeared hesitantly in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear but determined to help. "I saw them," she said in a trembling voice. "Men in dark clothing with covered faces, 6 or 7 of them. They took the woman and boy in a truck. Before they drove away, I heard one mention something about l'île, the island." "An island?" Traoré exchanged meaningful glances with Colonel Zita. "The weapons cache near Benfora that our prisoner reacted to, it's located on an island in Lake Tingrela. Connected to shore by a narrow causeway, easily defensible, but also potentially a trap for attackers." Hours later, as darkness enveloped Burkina Faso, 2 assault teams departed for their respective targets. One headed northeast toward Dori, while the other, with President Traoré among its members despite security protocols, moved southwest toward Banfora and Lake Tingrela. Their destination was a fortified compound on a small island connected to the mainland by an ancient stone causeway barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Through night vision equipment, Traoré studied the facility's defensive arrangements, guard towers at strategic points, patrol boats in the surrounding water, and searchlights sweeping the approaches at regular intervals. "We approach by water from multiple directions simultaneously," Traoré decided after careful reconnaissance. "Small, inflatable boats, coordinated insertion to overwhelm their perimeter security." At midnight, the assault team moved to concealed positions along the lakeshore. The water was calm, reflecting scattered stars in its dark surface. A light mist rising from the lake would provide additional concealment for their approach. "Remember," Traoré reminded his men, "hostage rescue is the primary objective. Fatima and Ismail take priority over everything else, including the weapons cache." The boats slipped silently into the water, their electric motors creating minimal noise as they approached the island from 3 different angles. The compound's guards were clearly watching for land-based approaches along the causeway, but had not anticipated amphibious assault. Moving through the facility's outer defenses, the team advanced toward buildings where prisoners would most likely be held. They intercepted radio communications, indicating a command structure preparing for imminent departure. Les héritiers were evacuating this location as well. In a basement area beneath the main building, they found what they were seeking. Fatima and Ismail huddled in a small, dark room, clearly frightened, but apparently unharmed. "Mr. President," Fatima gasped as Traoré cut their restraints. They kept asking about the Bible, about my father's connections to it. They wanted to know who else might have received similar information. "You're safe now," Traoré assured her, though he knew their situation remained precarious. "We're getting you out of here immediately." As they began moving toward their extraction point, explosions suddenly rocked the compound. Additional Les Héritiers forces were approaching from the mainland, having detected the rescue operation. "Reinforcements incoming," came urgent radio reports. "Multiple vehicles crossing the causeway." The team fought their way toward the shoreline through increasingly heavy resistance. Behind them, the weapons cache erupted in flames as demolition charges destroyed another arsenal that would have been used against innocent civilians. "Are we going to be safe, Mr. President?" young Ismail asked, with touching faith in authority figures. Traoré placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder as they reached their boats. "Yes, Ismail. Thanks to your courage in delivering your grandfather's Bible, we've struck serious blows against those who wish to harm our country." But even as they escaped across the dark waters of Lake Tingrela, Traoré knew the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Dawn was approaching, the new deadline for Les Héritiers' coordinated attacks. The conspiracy that had begun with a coded Bible was reaching its climax, and the survival of Burkina Faso hung in the balance. The race against time entered its final, most critical phase.